Asexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction takes place by mitosis. It's different ways, different forms, that's why we have different types, but it basically breaks down to mitosis and cell division. The key concepts to keep in mind as we cover this section is, what is asexual reproduction and why is it beneficial? And how do the types of asexual reproduction differ? Asexual reproduction is one parent. So one parent produces offspring without meiosis, without fertilization. Whereas sexual reproduction, remember, took two parents and you had to have meiosis to create the sperm and the ovum, so fertilization could make the zygote. But that's not what happens in asexual. One parent produces offspring. Because the offspring inherit all of the DNA, there's not a mixing of DNA from two individuals. They're getting all their DNA from one parent. They are genetically identical to each other and to the parent. Asexual reproduction then provides very little genetic variety. Now, why do you think I wouldn't say no genetic variety? Well, the reason is because of mutations. So mutations can occur and give a little bit of genetic variety, and also has to do with the activation of the genes that they have, or deactivation. There are different forms, all taking place by mitosis and cell division. First, we're going to look at fission and mitotic cell division, then fragmentation, budding, regeneration, spores, and cloning. And there's also vegetative reproduction. Cell division in prokaryotes. Now remember what a prokaryote is? It doesn't have a membrane-bound nucleus. It has DNA. Now when it divides, such as a bacterium, that's a prokaryotic cell. When it divides, it's going to produce two bacteria. And that process that they call is cytosis. Basically, it's going through cell division. It's not going through mitosis, though. Why? Because mitosis is the duplicating of a nucleus, and they do not have a nucleus. A prokaryote's DNA molecule is copied, and each copy then attached to the cell membrane. The cell grows longer and it pulls the two copies of DNA apart, while the cell membrane then starts to pinch in along the middle of the cell, and eventually it'll pinch all the way in, and you'll have two bacteria instead of one. That's fission. So through fission, the cell splits and forms two new identical offspring. Now, mitotic cell division is what it's called when it's a eukaryotic cell, when you do have an organized nucleus, when it goes through mitosis and cytokinesis to form. So any unicellular organism that can reproduce by mitotic and cell division, basically just dividing and forming two organisms. This is an animated picture showing you an amoeba that is going through mitotic cell division. Now remember, the parent that was the original parent is no longer there. It's in the two new daughter cells, which are two new amoeba. Fragmentation, when you think of a fragment, what do you think of? You think of a piece of something. And so fragmentation is a type of asexual reproduction. And what happens is it takes place in colonial organisms, such as what's pictured here is the Spirogyra. And the Spirogyra is in water, and some physical disturbance comes by, say a fishtail or something, swats it, and it breaks pieces off. Each piece then can become a new organism. How? By going through mitosis and forming the whole new colony again. Budding is when a new organism grows by mitosis and cell division on the body of the parent. It eventually then will separate from that parent and form a new organism. On the right there is budding yeast. On the left is sponges. And if you see down at the very bottom, this last sponge on the bottom to the right, you see it looks like a little baby sponge coming off top of it. And then over to the left, some more sponges. Those are buds. And each bud then forms by mitosis. And eventually will break off and form a whole new sponge, hydra, yeast, whatever. Regeneration. Now you know regeneration if you've ever, tried to catch a lizard and all of a sudden you're left with its tail. Now regeneration, when it just grows back another tail, that's not a form of reproduction because you had one lizard and you still have one lizard. So regeneration is the ability to replace missing structures, but in some organisms it's actually going to serve as a method of reproduction, such as the planarian that's showing there. The planarian is highly regenerative, and they've done different experiments where they've cut it in half and the tail grew a head and the head grew a tail. They've cut it longitudinally and the left half grew a right half and the right half grew a left half. It happens in a lot of other organisms. They're mentioned up there. The sea stars, sponges, sea urchins, sea cucumbers all have the ability to regenerate as a form of reproduction. In animal regeneration occurs when the offspring grows from a piece of its parent. And this is showing you where they've taken original planarian and they've divided it in half. And it grew a new tail and it grew a new head. Spores. What a spore is, some plants and fungi and mold, actually, it's not plants, but it's mold, fungus, and mushrooms, which is a fungus. They have this ability, because they have structures in them, that can make spores. And what a spore is, it's one of their cells. So it has the whole copy of DNA inside of it, and it has a hard protective coating. And then they're released. A good example, if you've ever stepped on a puffball. You stepped on that puffball and that puff. All that was coming out are all those spores. And each spore has the potential of becoming a new puffball or a new mushroom or a new mold. Like if you've ever left bread or a sandwich in your locker or something, forgot about it, and then all of a sudden you go back, and it's got mold growing all over it. Where'd that mold come from? Because there were spores. And when the conditions are right, that spore is going to come out of the covering, and it's going to go through mitosis and form the whole organism. Another type of asexual reproduction, and this occurs in plants, is called vegetative reproduction. And you can see a picture. This is actually a picture of mint. So spearmint. I've got some chocolate mint. I think I have some apple mint. There's all kinds that you can buy in the store. And you can easily get a lot more of them. If you plant them in a garden, they're going to take over your garden. Because underneath the soil, they're going to grow what is looking like that white thing. That's called a stolon. And what's going to pop up here and there off of that stolon are new mint plants. And how they're going to pop up? By mitosis forming it. So vegetative reproduction usually involves structures such as the root, the stems, and the leaves. And what a stolon is, it's an underground stem. Some other examples of vegetative reproduction: strawberry plants, the spider plant, which I have in my room. How do those little plantlets form? By mitosis, so they're identical to the parent. And you can also take a potato and put it in water, put part of it in water, and it will grow roots, and then out of the other part of the potato will grow potato plants. Another type of asexual reproduction is cloning. Cloning is a type of asexual reproduction that's performed in laboratories, and it produces identical individuals from a cell or from a cluster of cells that are taken from a multicellular organism. Scientists have been able to clone many animals with the chromosomes from one parent. Now, cloning's been done a long time with plants, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I forget how many years ago they first were successful in cloning Dolly, which is a sheep. So that was the first animal that they were successful with in cloning. So what they did is they removed a cell from one sheep. They call it sheep X here. This is how they produced Dolly. And then they took another cell, which was an unfertilized ovum or egg from the second sheep. They had to remove the DNA. Now, why do you think they need to remove the DNA when they fuse those two cells together? Because it would have 3 copies of the chromosomes instead of just 2. See, the body cell that they took it out of from X has 2 sets of chromosomes. The unfertilized egg had 1 set of chromosomes. So they took that out and they were successful in creating Dolly, the first successful animal cloning. Now, as I said with plants, plants have been cloned for a long time, and they use a method called tissue cultures. And this is done for several reasons, and some of them are that they can produce a lot of plants at one time and in less time. I saw this when I went to the Atlanta Botanical Gardens, because they have they're really big into orchids and saving, and this is one reason why plant cloning or cloning in any organism could be good. They could start saving and cloning organisms that are becoming extinct. And so they had a lot of their tissue cultures there growing different types of orchids, some of them that are pretty rare. There are some disadvantages, though. One disadvantage of asexual reproduction is that you don't get very much genetic variation. Now you think, okay, why? It's just be boring if they're all alike. No, there's more to it. If they are genetically alike, then they are more susceptible to diseases. So let's say in the culture a certain disease got in there, and if they're all genetically alike, then they could wipe out that whole species or that whole culture. Asexual reproduction can also be responsible for harmful genetic mutations. Now realize you're taking one cell. So when you take that one cell and clone other organisms from it, if that one cell has a harmful genetic mutation in it, you are passing that genetic mutation on to all the other organisms that were formed from that one cell. There are some advantages. One advantage of asexual reproduction is that it allows organisms to reproduce without a mate. So it saves time, saves energy, and asexual reproduction also enables some organisms to produce large numbers of offspring in a short amount of time.